everybody. Welcome to Webinar 2, Building Towards Success Through Shared Measurement. This is webinar number 2 in the Engaging Underrepresented Youth Collective Impact webinar series. The Engaging Underrepresented Youth Collective Impact webinar series is sponsored by Employment and Social Development Canada, the Learning Branch, and the Tamarack Institute. My name's Liz Weaver, and I'm the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute and your host for the webinar. Let me tell you a little bit about the Tamarack Institute. The Tamarack Institute is composed of two distinct parts. We have our Tamarack Learning Center, where we support learners and change makers like yourselves in 5 interconnected practices. The first of the practices is collective impact, and this webinar series is about collective impact. But we also support learners in community engagement, collaborative leadership, community innovation, and evaluating impact. The other part of Tamarack is working directly with communities in driving forward community change through our vibrant community partnerships. And so we're in 170 communities across Canada and the United States, and in those communities, there are leadership roundtables working to reduce poverty and deepen community. We have some goals for this webinar. The first goal is to review the collective impact framework for those of you that are not familiar with the framework, to learn a little bit more about the condition of shared measurement and what that means in a collective impact context, and then to be introduced to some tools that will help you develop a shared measurement approach for your collective impact efforts. And so hopefully you will learn a lot about shared measurement during the course of this webinar. So collective impact, let's begin with that. The folks at FSG and the Collective Impact Forum define collective impact as a disciplined, cross-sectored approach to solving complex social and environmental issues at scale. And what they mean by disciplined is that they have a framework that you should follow when you're implementing a collective impact approach. And we'll spend a bit of time about, really focusing on the core elements of this framework. The framework starts with 3 preconditions. The first of these 3 preconditions is influential champions. And when you think about the issue of engaging underrepresented youth, you want to think about who are the folks that we should gather around our table that actually can move the needle for underrepresented youth. And in some cases, in most cases, you would want to think, okay, we need to have youth themselves, particularly underrepresented youth, at our leadership table. We also want to have community organizations that are supporting youth. We might want to have business leaders, certainly the education sector, but there might be others in your community that you would identify as important and influential champions. The second precondition of collective impact is urgency of the issue. So is this issue that you're trying to tackle, this issue of engaging underrepresented youth, is it urgent and important? And how would we know that? We would know that by looking at data in our community. So are a large number of youth not represented? Are they not able to access employment? Are they not able to graduate from high school? So what is the urgency around the issue? And then finally, do we have enough human and financial resources to be able to move the needle on this issue, to really achieve change that we're envisioning together? And so those are the preconditions of collective impact. The next slide really looks at the core conditions of collective impact. And essentially, the collective impact framework has 5 kind of core conditions. The first is the development of a common agenda. The second condition is identifying the measures that will show that you are making progress, and then collecting the data and measuring the results consistently. The third condition is to align all the programs and services that already exist in your community in a way that we're getting to better impact and better outcomes for underrepresented youth. The fourth condition is continuous communication, and the fifth is backbone support. On this webinar, we're going to focus in on the condition of shared measurement, but we also have other webinars in this series that look at scoping a common agenda, that look at how we engage mutually reinforcing activities, and then our final webinar looks at continuous communication and backbone infrastructure. So in the course of these 4 webinars, we're going to focus in on each of the core conditions of collective impact, but this webinar is focused on shared measurement. So what do we know about shared measurement? Well, shared measurement is a practice that's been popularized through the collective impact approach, and it complements population level measurement. So it's really focusing on, how do we move the needle on the population goals that we're trying to move the needle on. So it's really important to think about this. If it's about engaging underrepresented youth, we need to know how many youth are not currently being engaged and how many youth would we like to see engaged in what time frame. That's about moving a population level measure. So what is shared measurement? It's a common set of metrics that helps us answer the questions: what progress are we making, and how does this information help us make better decisions? Shared measurement is not a simple data collection. It's really meant to inform our work and help us make these kind of better decisions. It's not also a one-time report. In fact, if collective impact work happens over a number of years, we want to be continually looking at progress that we're making so that we can make great decisions about, what is working and do more of that, and then think about what's not working and do less of that. And that's why shared measurement is so critical in a collective impact kind of context. So some of the benefits of engaging in a conversation about shared measurement and identifying those measures that we're going to track is that it really does help clarify the focus of our collective impact effort. It helps us track progress towards a shared goal. It helps us enable coordination and collaboration. So for example, if we have, 6 to 10 measures, we can communicate those to all of our partners, and the partners can begin to discern, is this program that I'm delivering in my organization, is it actually leading us to the change that we're envisioning for our community? By engaging in shared measurement, we can improve data quality. Having conversations about, what are the right measures that we are tracking really helps us kind of both better understand those measures, but then it also helps us kind of say, is this the right kind of quality? Are we getting the information, the data in a timely way that we can make important decisions? And so that's about enabling continuous learning and course correction. And it also allows us to catalyze action on the things that we're working on. So evaluation and shared measurement are kind of 2 different things in a collective impact context. They're both really important, but this webinar is going to focus on shared measurement, but we're going to talk to you about both of them. Evaluation is really that range of things that we might want to evaluate, which is planned and purposeful and collects information about our activities, the number of people that come to our programs and services, what their characteristics might be, that kind of thing. That's what we would include in the evaluation sphere. In the shared measurement sphere, it's those indicators that drive forward population level change. And so it's important to think about these as connected or interconnected, but that they are different, particularly from a collective impact kind of context. Shared measurement can be both an input to evaluation because it provides you with data, but it can also be an object of your evaluation process. So when you're thinking about shared measurements and setting up a shared measurement kind of practice, you want to have a design phase. And the design phase connects to your common agenda. So what have we defined in our common agenda? And what is that goal for change that the common agenda has set out, right? So do we want more youth graduating from high school? Do we want more youth to have access to employment opportunities? Do we want to have more youth that are engaged in post-secondary activity, whether it's college activity or university activity? So you want to kind of think about, okay, for us to achieve our common agenda, what are the elements in our common agenda that lead to population level change? What are the criteria for our evaluation and learning process? So how often are we going to look at this population level data? And then how are we going to make decisions about the trends that we see in this population level data? It's often good to establish an evaluation working group. And when you think about an evaluation working group, there are probably people in your community who are already engaged with population level data. They might work for your municipal government. They might be at a college or university if you have one in your community. They might be people that are at your school board. And so those are some of the folks that you might want to recruit onto your evaluation working group. For the fourth consideration in the design phase, you want to really conduct due diligence. So when you bring these folks around your evaluation working group, ask them what they're already measuring, and can those measures help inform your common agenda, and would they be willing to share that information? So leverage what's already being measured, as long as it helps you understand whether you're making a population level change or not. The fifth element is to select the metrics, and we would say that no more than 10 is actually a good level, although we say 10 to 15 on this slide. You want to have enough metrics that you can track things, track the change effectively, but not too many metrics that you are so confused by all the data that you have coming at you. And then you want to vet the core measures with different stakeholders that you might have in your community. The one thing that's really interesting about vetting it with stakeholders is that, you know, they can share their perspectives and their knowledge or what they see in terms of that metric. And they might, through conversation, identify some strategies that you can build into your common agenda approach. So it really is useful to vet with and engage stakeholders in your design phase. Building learning into shared measurement, here are some things that you might want to consider. You might want to form a shared measurement learning team. Their core job would be to review the data that's being tracked, to discuss both the challenges and the successes of the collective impact work, to test changes, and then to implement those that are working really well. So here are just some ideas that you can build into your evaluation and shared measurement learning team. When you think about indicators, there's some things that you might want to consider. And this is, again, thinking from the perspective of population level indicators. Is it a valid measure that is linked to our goal or to our sub-goals? Is it a measure that's easily understandable to our local stakeholders? Is the data collected by a trusted source? So that's a really important thing to consider when you're considering indicators, right? The reliability of the data and the trust in the source of the data. Is it comparable against different kinds of groups? Is it affordable to gather? Can it be disaggregated by different ethnicity or gender or other relevant criteria? Is there trend data that could be provided over the last 3 years? And really, each indicator should be influenced by some kind of local action. So there has to be a connection between the indicator and the common agenda strategies that you have already identified as part of the work that you're doing around collective impact. Here are some key lessons learned from other groups that have engaged in trying to embed shared measurement into their collective impact process. And one is that, you know, you don't have to wait to start collecting information and start measuring. You can begin at the beginning and begin to say, okay, so what should we be tracking? What are the measures that we want to really try to follow? You want to make sure that you have enough resources to be able to support your shared measurement and your evaluation practice. You want to also really focus on not only shared measurement, but also continuous learning. So here are some really important lessons to build into your shared measurement approach. Now we're going to give you an example. This is the Seattle Roadmap Project. This is a collective impact initiative in Seattle, Washington. And we're going to share with you their shared measurement approach. So the common agenda for the Seattle Roadmap project is to double the number of students in South King County and South Seattle who are on track to graduate from college or earn a career credential by 2020. They go on to say that they are committed to nothing less than closing the unacceptable achievement gaps for low-income students and children of color and increasing achievement for all students from cradle to college to career. So you can see in their common agenda statement that they have disaggregated, or they're intending to disaggregate some of their data in a way that they can show the difference for low-income students and children of color in their community. So really important to look at how their data is connected to their common agenda and the work that they're doing. So what the Seattle Roadmap project did was they set up some working groups, and they used a multi-step process to identify, vet, and refine their indicators. And so they really did that broader based engagement. So they developed working groups, they identified indicators, and they began to track progress over time. And so you can see their working groups. They had an early learning group, they had a K-12 group, they had an in-school group, they had a K-12 out-of-school group, and they had a post-secondary group. And so the groups were charged with really identifying the indicators for student success for their part of the cradle to college continuum. Here's an example of the indicators that they eventually landed on for the Seattle Roadmap project. So their indicators fall into three categories: readiness, so readiness to learn; achievement, so are children and youth in South Seattle and South King County, are they achieving at certain levels within the school system, and are they moving on to post-secondary or to some kind of training? And then attainment, right? So the number of students that enroll in post-secondary and the number of students that continue past the first year. So you can see, even though this seems fairly straightforward, there was lots and lots of conversations across Seattle around the set of indicators that they eventually landed on. Now they do annual reports in terms of their indicators, and if you can go onto the Seattle Roadmap project and really look at their annual reports. But here's a high-level annual report where they show the different neighborhoods, and they show the achievement rate in 2009, 2010, and where they were in 2012 and 2013. And they talk about, you know, is there a positive or negative change in the baseline that they started with? And are they on track for their 2020 target? What I like about this visual is that you can really see trending in across the neighborhoods. And you can then actually, if you were to take a learning approach, you could say, okay, so what's happening in Auburn and what's happening in Tooele, and how can we improve outcomes for other neighborhoods where we're not quite as successful? So it's almost like at a glance, you can begin to build in some of your evaluation and learning questions into what you're looking at. So what are some tools for shared measurement? And we have a number that we can suggest. So if you're looking at a broader evaluation approach, you might want to include things like, what are the process measures that we want to pay attention to? What are some of the program measures? What are some of the policy change measures for this work that we're engaged in, this collective impact work? And also, what are the population level measures? And here are some examples of different kind of measures. And in the middle should be your common agenda. So we're trying to engage underrepresented youth. One of our process measures might be the number of youth that are sitting at our leadership table. A program measure might be better coordinating the programs and seeing increased numbers of youth engaged in programs that are offered in our community. A policy change measure might be that we are working with community organizations to have a single door of entry. That's a policy change. And then a population level measure might be that the number of youth in our community who are under-engaged will be engaged in a more meaningful way at a percentage level. And so with that kind of population level change, you want to have a baseline so that you can track against that kind of baseline. So that's an outcome measurement mapping tool. Another tool that we use a lot at Tamarack is an outcomes diary. And an outcomes diary is really focused on diarizing or regularly gathering changes that you're seeing happening in the community as a result of your collective impact work. And so the benefits or changes that can happen for individuals or populations in your community. It can happen for organizations, and it can also happen from a policy change perspective. And the reason why it's a diary is that you collect this data on a regular basis. So levels of change might be impacts and changes for individuals, impacts and changes for the community, and then impacts and changes on policy shifts that you're observing. And what you always want to do in an outcomes diary is to really think about, to what degree did our collective impact work contribute to these changes that we're observing happening in the community. In some cases, you might be the sole contributor. In other cases, there might be a variety of different contributors, and you are just one of the contributors. Some of the success factors for an outcomes diary are regular collection of the results, building in feedback loops with your key stakeholders and those that are involved in your community change initiative, and then sense making and reflection about the trends and the patterns that you're seeing emerge from the diary as you collect it, the diarized information as you collect it. So here's on this slide is a link to a tool that we have on the Tamarack website for the outcomes diary if you're interested in finding out more about that tool. So thank you for listening to this webinar. For more information about collective impact and for more resources, please visit the Tamarack Community website, www.tamarackcommunity.ca. If you want to get in touch with me and to learn more about collective impact, you can reach me at liz@tamarackcommunity.ca. Thank you for joining us on the Engaging Underrepresented Youth Collective Impact webinar series. This webinar is sponsored by Employment and Social Development Canada, the Learning Branch, and by the Tamarack Institute.